Good morning. I'm Dr. Deborah Watson, Advisory Services Team Manager from Innovate UK Edge. This series, Innovate 2021, looks at enabling ambitious, innovative SMEs to overcome challenges and build for growth. So far, we've covered funding and finance, internationalisation and working lean. Each event promotes the broader bespoke support available from Innovate UK Edge and how we can add value to your future growth plans in this challenging environment. But before we start today, a little housekeeping. If you wish to ask a question, you can do that either in person or anonymously via the Q&A function. This will be moderated. If you need assistance, please raise your hand. And there is a chat function as well, which is unmoderated if you wish to chat with other attendees. For on demand, this webinar is being recorded and your personal video and microphones will not be used unless invited to speak by the host. Today, this will be an interactive session. We're using Slido. You can either join via a web browser or by going to slido.com and typing in the code INN21, or grab your mobile and scan the QR code and you can quickly join us. We will share these methods with you again to join throughout the session. It'll be on each of the Slido slides as we come up against it as we work our way through. So today, a brief introduction today as our speakers will elaborate themselves. We are pleased to welcome business psychologists and innovation and growth specialists, Anne-Marie Rowson and Caroline Gourlay, who will be looking at leadership and how to bring out the best in yourself and your organisation. If I can just remind you that as a participant of Innovate 2021 and subject to Innovate UK's eligibility criteria, there is the opportunity for you to access our comprehensive range of funded support. And I'll give you details of how we may be able to support you after we've heard from Caroline and Anne-Marie. So, handing over to you. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Morning. So welcome everybody. What we'd like to do today is showcase how we work with clients at Innovate UK. And we're going to take you through what we work on with our clients, how we work with our clients, and then describe some of the tools that we use to support our work. If you have any questions as we're moving through the section, please use the Q&A channel, as we've got some time set aside at the end to deal with any questions that you'd like to offer up. The format is essentially a conversation. We invite you to listen in to a conversation between Caroline and myself as we talk about what we do with our clients, obviously protecting any confidentiality issues. And we hope that this will be the best way to give you a flavour of the support that we could offer you moving forwards. So let me just say a little bit more about my colleague Caroline. Caroline is a chartered psychologist and she has over 20 years of experience in assessment and development of leaders and leadership teams. So she supports leaders in scale-up businesses on behalf of Innovate UK, and also advises on leadership issues for businesses in distress as an associate member of the Institute for Turnaround. Caroline also supports leaders in private equity-backed businesses and assesses leadership teams on behalf of investors. So she has a great insight into what it is that investors are looking for in terms of leadership capability in organisations looking for investment. She has also coached on leadership programmes at the Side Business School, which is part of Oxford University.
Thank you. So I shall now tell you more about Anne-Marie. And Anne-Marie has been a leader. Anne-Marie has 30 years experience as both a leader and working with leaders in various contexts. She's trained as a business psychologist and an executive coach. She's assessed hundreds of leaders in development and selection, promotion sort of situations. So she really understands what it takes to be a leader. And over that 30 years, she's compiled quite a broad and deep toolkit to support her work. And some of those ideas and models will be part of what we share in the last part of the session. Anne-Marie, having lived and worked abroad, now lives in South Somerset, whereas I live in Bath, and she enjoys anything that takes her outdoors. And that may also be something that we bring in at some point into our discussions.
Nice segue, Caroline. So look, let's start off by exploring what we do with clients. So tell me a little bit about who you've been working with and what's been the contexts within which you've delivered some of your packages of support.
Okay, so I've worked with a wide range of businesses, but I was thinking about, how would you categorize them? And there seem to be clusters around technology, as you might expect, in various forms, from sort of pure IT through to robotics. There are clusters that are to do with various forms of green energy, green building, the sort of eco space. And then I seem to be picking up design agencies who are always very interesting, creative people. And sometimes what I'm working with are experienced leaders who just want a sounding board. Sometimes I work with an experienced leader who says, I would love to have this coaching for myself, but I think it'd be better if I give it to my team who need it more than I do. So I'm sort of bringing on the next generation. And sometimes I'm working with people who are younger, perhaps relatively new to leadership, maybe haven't really worked anywhere else, certainly not anywhere else in a leadership capacity, and want to make sure they're getting it right. So sort of concerned about what might I be missing, what don't I know. And the context, generally, I've been working with Innovate UK Edge now for, I can't remember whether it's 3 or 4 years, but that sort of time. So in the olden days, I was working with them the 4 times. And the context then was about scaling up. I was in there at the point of the pandemic, and so some of the people I was already working with, there were questions around sort of pivoting. Some of the clients I've worked with in the last year have been on COVID related, COVID recovery grant programs, but actually COVID isn't necessarily the thing that they've usually worked out what they need to do by the time I talk to them. So it's just a question of working through the day-to-day and sort of working out of this situation. But we don't tend to talk about the pandemic much. How about you?
Well, similar really. I haven't been working with Innovate UK for as long as you, so just over 6 months or so, but I've worked with a huge variety of different clients, ranging from organisations that are still in what I call the entrepreneurial phase, the touch and go phase, where they're still reliant on investor funding. They're looking for the next round of investor funding to be able to keep going. Other clients have perhaps been going for upwards of 10 years and fairly well established, but looking to go to the next level, or potentially the founder is looking for an exit strategy, not right now, but in 5 or 10 years time, because as we know, it takes time to plan that exit strategy. So hugely varying. Some of them are kind of, towards the end of their careers and very experienced leaders. Others, like yourself, just starting out, may have had some large corporate experience, perhaps didn't like it, have set up their own organisations and are very clear about the culture they want to have in their own organisations and how they want to lead. But they haven't had enough exposure, if you like, to some of the more sophisticated and established people processes. So how do you manage performance in an organisation? How do you create the culture that you want? When something is your baby, how do you then bring in other people, particularly at senior levels, to help you grow that organisation rather than take it off in a different direction? So supporting sometimes on hiring practices and processes, but not the usual kind of how do you go out and source your candidates, but actually how do you decide what it is that you're looking for in your new colleagues, and then how do you actually assess for that?
Yeah. And what's the sort of range of issues that people are bringing to you?
Well, again, that's hugely varied. So with one organisation, which is in the sustainable green energy field, has been established for quite some time, we're looking at the talent around the management table. So it's a relatively new management team. The founder is thinking about sort of 5 to 10 years down the line, and is struggling, if I'm honest, with a lack of energy and drive and ambition from the rest of the management team. It always comes from them as an individual. And so we are looking at what needs to happen to strengthen that management team so that either it's ready for a management buyout, or it's a great looking management team for an external purchaser, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
In other cases, I'm working with an individual, fabulous, inspirational female leader who has got 2 companies on the go, both in very different phases. One is pretty well established, but trying to negotiate Brexit, because that has a whole impact for her in terms of being able to export what she produces. And the other business is very much in startup, and she's a busy mum, and she's just coming out of a year where she's been homeschooling 3 children and trying to be chief exec in 2 companies. So really we're focusing on her and creating time and space for her to stand still, to orient herself and to decide on what she wants to do next. So we've done some visioning around career, and now we're moving on to effective leadership, because this is an individual that has stepped out of an academic world and a very successful academic career, and has not had any formal training in leadership. But now she has a substantial staff that she needs to inspire, and so we're going to be working on her own leadership. How about what about your clients?
Again, wide range of issues. One of the things that comes up quite a lot is time management and prioritization, and that whole thing about working in the business rather than on the business. That's a theme that occurs quite often. Things around managing your own resilience, that comes up a lot. Confidence, particularly with people who are newer and younger and so on, but not always. That can come up with older people as well. Sometimes some very specific issues. I worked with one business where they had a really tricky non-exec director on their board, who frankly was a bit of a parasite. I think he had another business that was supplying them, and really he was only in there when he was there pretending he was a non-exec director. He was actually there representing his other company, and so we looked at how they extricated themselves from that situation. So quite, sometimes quite specifics. And I have another one, but part of that exit strategy thing that you've been talking about, where there's 2 founders. One of them is retiring, and what they're doing is converting the part of the company into an employee-owned trust. So there's a huge issues around, well, how does leadership function when the employees own the company? And actually I then had a second one that became completely an employee-owned trust. So that's which seems to be becoming a bit of it's becoming quite a popular option for leaders.
And that reminds me of something the concept that I work with, which I hadn't included in the slides that we'll take a look at later on, around balanced leadership, and where does the work of leadership happen in organizations these days. And I'm finding with certainly my I don't know if we can say this these days, so forgive me if I say the wrong thing here, but my emerging leaders, if you like, those who are early in their career, who want a different kind of workplace from that which they've experienced, and that perhaps which their parents have experienced. And so they are taking a very different view of what leadership looks like. And they're absolutely moving away from sort of this top-down, heroic sort of archetype of leadership. I worked with a really interesting organisation, and 3 ex-military guys, very different, and a mix of non-commissioned and commissioned around the table, just 3 of them. And one's overseas, 2, actually one's in the UK, one's in a European country, and one's over further away.
A long way away.
A long way away. I'm trying desperately not to expose anybody in case you're on the call. And the dynamics between the 3 of them that were playing out around the management table, if you like, were the dynamics from when they were all in the forces. And so we looked at power bases, and we looked at how they established better working relationships between the 3 of them, and how they could enable each other to make the relevant contributions to leading, because it was very uneven, it was dysfunctional, they were on the verge, these were their words, they were on the verge of kind of just splitting up basically, because the relationships weren't working. And it just took sort of 2 or 3 facilitated conversations to get them back around the table and working in a much more productive way.
I've done some sessions where I have been mostly working with one person in a business, and then I've done a little bit of work with a colleague, and then we've done a joint thing on, so when I send you this, you know, you're in the middle of writing code and I send you this, that doesn't really work for you, and how do we fix it? You know, how do we communicate when we're under such pressure? We're launching something, the pressure is enormous. I'm out there selling, you're there writing, and we both feel that we're the one doing all the work. How do we actually bring that together in a way that we see we're actually working together on this, rather than start resenting each other?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a sort of classic, isn't it? And that it's what I found with some of where I've worked with teams, might be founding teams, it might be the founders plus newbies that are coming in to help lead the business, is we focused attention on what does it look like to lead the business rather than do the business. It's that lovely phrase. In fact, it's your phrase, Caroline, which I'm copying. How do we enable them to identify what the jobs of work are that are associated with leading the business rather than being in it and doing it? And I would say if you're out there selling, or if you're in there dealing with code, you're doing the business, you're not leading the business. And for some founders, the reality is that leading the business is not their cup of tea. And so then they have that thought process to go through of, right, how do I outsource the leadership of the business, and I can still be the founder, and it's still my business, it's still my baby, I've still got controlling interest, I've still got influence and power, but I can do the things that I like, but I'm making sure that the business is being properly led.
And one of the things I think it's really important to stress here is there's nothing wrong with working in the business. You know, particularly at the beginning stage, there are times when you do have to write the code. Someone has to write the code, and if there's only two of you, it's going to be one of you. It's just that if that's all you do, then the business isn't being led. And interestingly, I was working with another tech business recently, and I sent a kind of diagnostic questionnaire to start with that was all about leadership. It's based on a model that I'll bring up at the end. And when I had my first session, the guy said, look, I had to look at it, but it really wasn't relevant for us because, you know, we're a smallish business and we don't do that sort of thing. And by, you know, at the end of the first session, he's realized, oh, basically what's happening here is nobody's leading our business. That's, and so now what we are actually looking at is he doesn't want to do it. He doesn't want to do it, but he does want, he's in his early 60s, I think. He wants to exit that business. So someone's going to have to do it. Else he doesn't have a business that would be of interest to anybody. So, we're looking at who does he need to bring in that will support him to do the bits that he doesn't want to do and has avoided for a good 12, 15 years, I think.
And that thought that I need the equity in my business to fund my pension and my retirement kind of focuses the mind a little bit.
It does. It does.
So we could talk for hours, because we know we do frequently talk for hours about this stuff. We should probably check to see if there's anybody out there.
Apparently there is. Well done for those of you who have made it first thing on the first morning after a long weekend. Thank you for making the effort. But yes, perhaps time to put a question out to the audience. So we're in the we're very much in this tech Slido stuff here that Deborah described at the beginning. So either join us at slido.com and put in hashtag in21, or scan the QR code there, and then thinking about your own business. What are your key challenges as a leader? And I know that actually there are some people on the call who are advisors who I think are trying to suss out, well, what the hell do these two psychologists do here? So thinking about the businesses that you work with, what are your key challenges, their key challenges as a leader generally, do you see? And this will form a lovely word cloud if you put words in.
So don't be shy.
Don't be shy.
It's quite anonymous, so you can be
yeah,
honest about what it is that's taking up your time.
And interesting that the three coming in so far there's a definite theme there. So that this sense that I have, where I work with a lot of my clients, that the planning, the prioritization, the focus, the getting out of the weeds.
And I find that leads me on to another challenge for a lot of leaders, which is delegation.
Yeah.
You know, exactly, letting go. That's a
Mm.
great one. How to be comfortable, how to build the team that gives you the confidence to then delegate and let go, so that you can go off and do the leadership stuff.
Yeah, and creating one team is interesting, because one of the things that I find a trap leaders often fall into is to have really good one-to-one relationships with their direct reports. But they don't have them. There's nothing going on between without them there. You know, people don't talk to each other much, so it's just all. It's what there's a term for it, spoken wheel, or hub and, you know, so hub and spoke. So everything's coming from the centre. So creating a team means that you have to be confident enough for people to talk without you there, and very insecure leaders often don't feel comfortable with that.
Absolutely. I was going to say the dark side of that spoken, you know, hub and spoke thing is the whole divide and conquer.
Yes.
So, you know, if you keep everything linked to you, it maintains your power base.
Yes.
Well, you know, that's really not effective leadership.
No.
And so how do you build that team, and how do you set expectations of that team as a collective? Because I think there are a lot of assumptions. I find a number of my leaders would be towards the introverted end of the introversion extroversion spectrum, and so they carry a lot of thoughts in their head, and they think they've communicated, and they think people know, and they think it's obvious, but it isn't. And so we might do a bit of work on actually what is it that you need to articulate, and how might you do that. And then some of my leaders, in particular, I have to say, my wonderful female leaders, they are not comfortable with the authority of being a leader, and they feel a bit embarrassed or uncomfortable to ask people to do things for them. They're not comfortable calling the shots, as it were. So we take a look at that, which I suppose is where we dip into our psychologist toolkit around who is the person.
Yeah.
What's influencing their thought patterns? What's going on in there that's influencing their behaviours?
And one of the things I wanted to pick up on there is that, you know, you're finding perhaps a majority of the clients you're working with are more introverted than extroverted, and I think that might surprise people, because I think there is a concept here, a stereotype that leaders are always extroverts.
Yeah.
And there is something about extroverts that they have more of a drive to lead. So you do find that more extroverts will push themselves forward to take a lead and to take charge of situations. But the idea that introverts can't be effective leaders is absolute nonsense. And if there's anybody out there who is an introverted, who's worried that they're too introverted to lead, I would really recommend Susan Cain's work. Susan Cain, she's got a book and also a TED talk on the quiet power of introverts.
Right.
Really worth a look.
Yeah. So that's an interesting session. So letting go. So that delegation bit, that's clearly a tick to box, and finding the time, making the time to lead. So those two are obviously hugely connected, aren't they?
Yes.
Right.
Yes, they are. And then they connect, of course, with creating the team and training, motivating, bringing on the people at the level below, because you can't let go, and you won't find the time unless you have people that you can delegate to, and that you feel comfortable delegating to. And there's two sides to that. There's them, and then there's you.
Yes, absolutely. And I was working with a client who presented, if you like, with the issue of the team. There was a problem with the team, and so in conversation with him, we decided to look at how he asked for what he wanted from the team, as well as why he might not be, why the team might not be able to give him what it was he was looking for, because it's always two-sided. Both parties make a contribution to that. And what we found was that he wasn't necessarily asking for what he wanted directly. He was assuming that they would just bring it because they were around the management table. And then when we looked at the management team, we discovered actually that in terms of qualities and makeup, that team was not an ambitious, driven, visionary team. They were loyal, hardworking, trustworthy, reliable, very, very capable, but not driven, not ambitious, and not visionary. They relied on him for those qualities. So of course his challenge is over the next few years, how does he now either develop those capabilities in that team, or how does he bring those capabilities into the team by adding some new members? Speaking of time, I haven't got a clue where we're at, Caroline.
Okay, well I do. I have, so you're all right.
Oh,
How would you? It's my turn to ask you a question. How would you describe the support you offer to your clients?
All right, we may have a slide on this.
I think we have.
Yeah. So I tend to offer a mix of coaching, mentoring, consulting, and advising. So it depends very much on what we agree, myself and the client. We'll have an introductory chat, we'll talk about the issues that are presented, and then we'll decide on an approach. And that work is always what I call emergent, and it changes. So with one client, we decided we were going to do something with the team and a little bit with him as the leader. And then he actually decided he wanted all the hours for himself. So we switched, and he just had a whole chunk of one-to-one leadership coaching. We're now moving on to a second package where we're going to do more consulting advising, and I'm going to help him with talent review of his top team. With another client, I've just got something along the lines of 20 hours of one-to-one coaching spread out over a 6-month period, because the focus is on enabling them to become a more effective leader so that they can lead their business. How about yourself?
The word I would use is tailored, you know. So what I try to do when I start working with a client is say, well, you know, this is what we've got, this is the package, and the advisor who allocated the work to me will have fleshed out some of what is needed, but often it takes a bit more digging, it takes a bit more exploration to see, okay, well, what could we do with this time? And so I had a situation very recently actually with excuse me, someone who's an experienced leader, and he's got his own coach privately, so the work was not for him, but he's got a team who are all quite young, and we looked at, well, all right, well, what could we do with that time? And what we ended up with after a lot of exploration was there were two options. Either they could each have one coaching session where they came along, and it'd be quite short, like, you know, an hour or something. They came along with their, you know, what's your biggest headache? What's the thing that's bugging you? What, you know, might be a relationship with someone, or something sticky, or managing your time, or confidence, or whatever it is. So they'd each have one session, or we would do a team event. And he said, well, I kind of like both of those ideas, but he took it back to them. And they were really enthusiastic about the idea of doing a team event. And we're actually waiting until we can do it in person, because they're in Bath and I'm in Bath. And it will become a celebration. As you know, there'll be things there about how do we work together? How have we worked together? How did we, and we obviously we're going to bring in, how did we work together when it was all remote working? What do we want to work towards? What's working well? Let's celebrate how well we've done. And we'll end with lunch, and I'm looking forward to it immensely.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
I did, the sun's just come out here. It reminded me that a couple of weeks ago, I did a virtual walking coaching session with one of my clients, and we did it by telephone. So we synced the time at which we would leave our houses, and I had my earphones in, she had her earphones in, and we poodled off, as we both live near countryside, and we poodled off for our own little walks, and I found a little bench somewhere and sat down in the sunshine with the most fantastic view, and I could really tune in to what she was telling me, and I could observe, you know, I was observing, if you like, with my ears, and reflecting, listening back, and we actually got to quite a significant level of depth around some emotions that really needed to be processed in order for her thinking to be cleared up, because these emotions were clouding her thinking. It's got nothing to do with intellectual capability, because this person has a brain the size of a planet, but it was about dealing with emotions and some of the past that was interfering with what was going on in the present and stopping her from developing the future.
Yeah.
And with another client, I had 2 or 3 conversations with one director, and on the back of that, I produced a report against the Growth Mapper framework that was a kind of traffic light system. So based on what I had heard about what was going on in the company, what leadership areas of activity were red, green, or amber. And that was then presented to the MD, who at the time thought he didn't have time to engage in this. And what that report did was kind of jolt him into realizing what the situation was and what was likely to happen with the company, what the risks were. And this MD was hugely committed to the company. And he then came to the table, and I had a one-to-one with him. And then we had a 3-way conversation with bringing the other director in. And the conversation was really about their relationship and what they needed to do differently for the health of the business. So it varies hugely. It's very bespoke. It's emergent. It's flexible and adaptable. It's very difficult to describe, I find.
Yes.
And what it's not is it's not teaching. I don't know about you, but I don't offer a fixed curriculum of, right, session 1 will do this, session 2 will do that, and session 3 will do, I don't offer leadership training. I don't have a course that I will roll out in a series of one-to-one webinars.
I think there are things that clients will get from us because we might, excuse me, we might bring in some models, we might talk about things in a way that they haven't thought about before. So there is some learning. There's a lot of learning that comes from it. It's not, one of the things I would say is that there is this idea of pure coaching, very, very pure coaching, where people say, well, and what do you think your options are? And nothing comes from the coach. It's all just, and how do you feel about that? And just asking the right questions. And there's a place for that. And that's not how I work. I get the impression it's not how you work either. So there's a kind of moving into, okay, well, let me make this suggestion, or have you thought about this? Or let's use this model as a framework for thinking about your business, because you might not have thought about this bit. But no, the idea that even for a given client, the idea that we would know at the end of the first session what the 6th session might look like, no idea, because it's adapting to how people, to how the situation is changing. The nearest I got to something that was very structured was the one where the very experienced MD said, I'd rather my 3 direct reports had this work. And we came up with a lovely program where she and each person filled in a kind of leadership assessment that was based on the model that I use most frequently, that I'll share later, and looked at, how much is this part of your job? What is it that you might need to work on here? And then they brought that to a session with me, and we had a coaching session, and then they had another coaching session, and she came in at the end, and they were able to describe to her, this is what we've been doing. And she could say, well, these are the changes I've seen. And we looked at, well, what's the next step in their development, and what can she do to support them? And she was a really insightful and supportive leader, and the difference in those 3 sessions was absolutely astonishing. One of them was very much about coordination in the business, and there were issues that came out of it that were very much organizational issues, so things that it was important that the MD knew about. And one of the others, it was it almost became about presentation skills training and confidence, massively different issues depending on what it was that people were facing. And one of the beauties of this is you have no idea kind of who's going to turn up, and sometimes you have no idea who's going to turn up with the same person from session to session, because they can be in a very different place. You can have someone who's going through some quite emotional stuff one week, and the whole thing is about emotional stuff, and the next time you see them, we're really focused on the business, because that's the thing that's needed. But I am so nicking that virtual walking thing, because I've done walking coaching for years, and over lockdown, some of my clients have really valued coming to Bath. They come to Bath because otherwise the the travel time comes out of the allowance, and that would be a waste of the time. And I've had lovely walks in Victoria Park. I've walked along the river with people, and what people find is that they think differently when they're walking. And there's something about being in nature that is very, there's studies on this, is very nourishing. Apparently, if you have a big view, you're more likely to have big thoughts. So getting out when we're trying to do strategic or directional stuff is really, really helpful. But I've only ever done it with the person. I haven't done, let's both go for a walk, but somewhere else. So I'm stealing that.
I found when I was sitting on my bench listening to my client, not looking at her either directly in person or through a screen, I think I asked very different questions.
Interesting.
And I just think my brain worked differently. So I think it benefits both us as coaches and our clients. So look, who has it ever gone wrong?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. Yes, I think the people that it's not worked so well for are people who don't like to reflect. I'm thinking about a business that I worked with a little while ago. There were 3 of them. They were hugely ambitious. They'd grown. It was quite well-established business. They'd grown it quite quickly, and they had ambitious plans to grow it again and then sell it on. And they were all just working in the business night and day. They were really, really focused. And so when you try to get them to come out and reflect, they didn't really want to go there. And I did some work with them together and some work with them individually. And one of the things I reflected back to them was that they were all fast-paced, ambitious, get on with it people. And so who was the break? Who was the person that was getting them to stop and reflect? And they kind of went, yeah, take your point, sort of thing, but yeah. And they were just not really reflective people. And what they were saying was, well, can you give us 2 or 3 things that we should do? Right. And I said, KPIs, you haven't got any key performance indicators. And they went, well, that's not a thing. What about create some KPIs? That's a thing. But So they
wanted to be led.
I think what they wanted really was training. They wanted a training program. And
I found I had one of my clients that came to me, and this was a director of the business, and he wanted me to tell them what they should be doing. He wanted me to tell the team of directors what their jobs of work were, and I felt that was not my job. And so we had some quite robust conversations about their ability to divide up their roles and responsibilities themselves, and that was the job of leadership.
Yes.
And this individual came from he was ex-military, came from a very, very structured environment when it had always been very clear for him what he needed to do every step of the way. And suddenly he was in a situation where he was having to chart the course. And really, he wanted somebody to chart the course for him. And it's not what I think my role is, either as a coach outside of Innovate UK or within Innovate UK. It's to enable them to do the work of leadership. The other time where I felt it wasn't the right time for the work was that this business was at very, very early stages, still looking for investor funding. A couple of the founding directors were still engaged in formal study. A third one was fully employed in another job, because obviously this business wasn't yet generating enough to pay wages. And there just was not enough going on with regards to that business for me to offer any support. There was no operating going on. There was no leading to be done. There was no one to lead necessarily. So we had 2 or 3 really interesting conversations around some of the dynamics that were happening in that leadership team and how the individual could best position themselves to get their own needs met around that table and to draw out productive contributions rather than unproductive contributions from the others. And then basically we put the support on hold. I think we're able to transfer their hours to a different advisor or a different specialist, one that could offer something that was more relevant at that particular point in time. And there's always the option then to reopen that particular package further down the line.
I think it's time we asked another question.
Yes.
So here we are. Off you go. You do this one.
Oh, this is my question. Quite right. Yes. So same format as before, really. We'll put up a QR code in a moment for you. There we go. So again, slido.com. Put in INN21 or use the QR code with your camera on your phone. And the question is, what leadership issues, challenges, or stuff might you find it useful to discuss with a coach? So think about your own situation, or if you're an advisor, think about some of the leaders that you've been talking with. What do you think you might want to bring to a conversation with a coach? Doesn't matter how personal it is, because people bring all sorts of things to conversations. Lazy co-founder, that is a classic. Are they lazy, or do they just not know what they want to do?
Or not know what they're doing?
Yeah, managing talent. Yeah, it's a tricky one.
Priorities, which echoes right back to the previous one. My lack of a confidence one.
Yes.
Yes.
Do you know what strikes me is I've worked with leaders in lots of large corporates as well, big well-known brands, and these are exactly the same issues. So, you know, leadership is leadership is leadership, and the challenges are the same wherever you go. It's just the context which is slightly different. And I really feel sometimes for leaders in the smaller organizations, because they don't have like an HR department to support them. They don't have learning and development folks or talent directors to help them out. They've literally got to do everything.
I think time-wise, it's time we moved on.
Okay.
So we're going to look at the things that we draw on, and a quick walkthrough. And I've got a feeling that my slides come first here. So so this is the model that I keep harking on about, that I use as a framework. It's not my model, but I find it suits an awful lot of different situations, and it describes 8 tasks of leadership, 7 that sit in the Venn diagram, and the overarching one, which is really important, that's coping with pressure. And it shows the domains in which leadership takes place. So there's a strategic, an operational, and an interpersonal domain, and each of those has a core task, and then they have tasks where they overlap. And if I go through it really quickly, you know, you start off in that green area at the top, working out where you're going. You put some plans, processes, structures in place, and then you deliver results. And the delivery of results is not the doing. It's not making cheese or selling whatever it is, or renting out holiday homes. The delivery of results is the monitoring of the delivery of results, the leading of the delivery of results. And in an old style sort of command and control type of leadership, the one that you were saying people are trying to move away from, that's all you do. You just work out where you go, and you put your structures in place, and you whip people until they deliver. And what you get, of course, is a kind of grudging compliance, and I don't define that as leadership. So then you bring in the interpersonal domain, and the bit between strategic and interpersonal is creating alignment. So getting all of your ducks in a row. And that's often a really interesting place where things break down, you know, between co-founders, that bit about becoming an employee-owned trust, you know, creating alignment about where we're going. It's very different in those situations. Between the building relationships and delivering results is the team working space. So making sure that you've got the right people in the right place, doing the right things. And then right in the middle is that leading space where you bring it all together, and you set the values of the organization, you live by them, you're a role model, you're visible, you take the tough decisions, but you also stand back and say, well, where should we put our effort and attention now? Because if results are down and you just focus on delivering results, that may not be the thing that's going to help. If you're going in the wrong direction, or you're all going in different directions, or your team isn't structured correctly, or your systems are rubbish, then pushing harder for results won't make the difference. So focusing on what is the thing we should be focusing on now is really important. And the most common way that this goes wrong, if we move on to the next slide, is that nobody does any of it. You know, that's what it looks like when everybody is just working in the business. They don't do this. And then another thing that I find, this is just a distinction that I've come up with myself, but I find a lot of people don't think about this very much, and it often clicks things into place for people. If we could just move on, one is the difference between operational and project management. And what I find is that we tend to be brought up in one or other of those disciplines. So I come from a project background. I used to be in IT. I see my work now as very project-based. So everything's about deadlines and milestones and working within a budget and scope. I've had to learn, because I run my own business outside of the Innovate UK work, I've had to learn about operational management, about, well, how many leads do I need before I've got a sale? How many, what is my income target? What's my revenue target? Whereas lots of people are brought up with revenue targets and, you know, operational management, don't know how to deliver a strategic change project, because thinking about things from a deadlines perspective as opposed to a target perspective is difficult. And if you run your own business, you have to be able to do both. And thinking, which one am I doing at the moment, is something that's often useful for people in that time management sort of piece that I talked about. So what are some of the things that you draw on, Anne-Marie?
Well, that one really resonates with me as well, because I noticed when I moved from being a consultant, working for a consultancy firm, into an internal job as a sort of running a function in a large organization, it took me a while to click that I really needed to be looking at the operational management of my job and setting KPIs for 2 or 3 years worth of concerted effort, not just managing my individual projects. So I really like that distinction. So the next slide shows phases of organizational growth. And I often use this with organizations, with leaders, to help them understand where they are in the overall context of an organization's life. And this is based on some work by Greiner way back in the 70s, but it's still hugely relevant. And most of the organizations that I work with from Innovate UK are in phase 1 or phase 2. So very much around sort of the entrepreneurial phase moving into consolidation. And you can see that the main crisis that can stop an organization from moving from one phase to the next is a crisis of leadership, not just at the top, but also putting in scalable leadership at different levels in the organization as well. Even if you've only got a headcount of 20 or 30 people, you've got more than one level of leadership there.
Yeah.
The next slide shows some of the paradoxes of leadership that I find come to the table in the conversations that I have. And I think those would hopefully resonate with anybody that's still with us on this webinar. And certainly, this dilemma between how can you have both chaos and system? How do you drive change but also ensure continuity? How do you balance managing your costs as well as investing strategically? So we'll often talk through this paradox and how you hold both of these as a leader. Moving on, the leadership pipeline features quite a lot in my conversations, and this is based on most recently the work of Sharon, Knoll and Drotter. But to be honest, although they published a book back in the noughties that packaged this beautifully, we've always known this, that all organizations have a hierarchy of leadership work, and it starts at the bottom left with leading self. We start our careers as individual contributors, we're only leading ourselves. If we're going to progress through an organization, we move on to leading others, or a first line supervisor, first line manager. The next transition is then on to leading managers. So most of your direct reports are managers, and we need to engage with them in very different ways. Then we move on to leading a function, which is where you have multiple teams doing different things coming together under your remit. And then into the leading organizations. This is a slightly simplified hierarchy. But what I find is that leaders in small organizations are having to play across all levels, and they're having to acknowledge the transition much more clearly. And often they don't really understand or haven't cottoned on to the difference between what happens at their level of executive leadership versus at first line level. And they're trying to run an organization with a first line manager's mindset. So shifting from being a first line manager to being an executive leader is hugely important.
And I'll just add that, you know, when you get into the nitty gritty of the time management bit, there is work to do on leading yourself.
Absolutely.
You know, I speak as a deadline driven, you know, hopeless without one, not terribly effective.
That's me.
Even managing myself is a challenge at times. So.
Yes, I'm pressure prompted as well.
God, yes.
And so, but absolutely, at the top, when you're leading an organisation, the way in which you add value, the way in which you spend your time is very different from when you're leading others, for example. So that brings me to the next slide, which is executive competencies. So, you know, what's a competency? A competency is a list of behaviours that define what good looks like. So I find having conversations around some of these competencies and whether or not the leaders that I'm working with have got these competencies, or whether it's their own development agenda that they need to go off and work on, is often very useful for them. But also applying this to management teams as well, and looking at who's got what and who's missing what and how do we close the gaps. Which brings me to the last piece, which is the jobs of work. So these, I think, are the bulk of the jobs of work that need to happen in organisations. And if we could overlay this, if we had more time, we could overlay this onto your primary colours model, and look up out of these which are strategic, which are operational, and some will have a bit of both in. But how, as a leadership team, do you divide up these jobs of work, and what do they look like in your organisation? And they will change over time as your organisation grows. What needs to happen? What do you need to be paying attention to? And software development isn't in there at all, really, unless it sits in the research and development.
Well, there's an information technology.
Yeah. But it just, the point is that there's all of this that leaders, leaders need to be paying attention to in some way, shape or form, or need to be having someone else pay attention to it on their behalf. Yeah. So that's a quick sort of whistle-stop tour, I think, through the sorts of things that we might draw on in terms of our work. I think we might be ready to open it out for questions. Was there anything else, Caroline, you wanted to say to any listeners?
I think that that covers it, really.
Okay.
Well,
I'm
that's
slightly jealous that you've got more you had more models and things than me, but I just
right now, before you start squabbling, I need to come back in and control the Q&A.
Yeah. Thanks, Deborah.
Right. We have a few questions. If anyone else has any questions, do stick them in either the chat or the Q&A, but we do have some to kick off with. So you're going to just argue over who's going to answer these now, aren't you? So when working with leaders, how does your support then translate into learning new skills? Who would like to tackle that one?
Say that again, please.
When working with leaders, how does your support then translate into learning new skills?
Okay. Do you have an answer, Caroline, or a thought?
I'm wondering what sort of skills people are thinking of, because if you think about leadership skills, let's take one of the ones that's come up quite a lot is delegation. So if delegating as a skill is part of what we're working on, then we wouldn't be looking at delegating, what are the, let me teach you how to delegate. We'd be there might be some fundamentals that we'd bring in, but then we'd be looking at, okay, so what is it that you've got to delegate and to whom? And let's try that out. What's going to feel uncomfortable for you about that? So this is about making this person a delegator and then trying things out and gradually developing that skill, rather than saying, well, it's not a teaching thing. This is how you delegate. Now go off and do it.
Very bespoke.
Very bespoke, yeah.
Yeah, and I would say that this thing about skills is, it's not about I don't teach new skills necessarily, but that may come, you know, if somebody's talking about influencing, how do they become more influential, then we may look at strategies and techniques and models that they can use. But what our work is about essentially is driving change, behavioural change. So I would be looking for my leaders to be doing things differently as a result of the conversations that I have been having with them. And that means that their behaviour has changed. They have become more versatile from a behavioural perspective. And that for me equates to developing new skills. Skills are really just a demonstration of behaviours.
Lovely, thank you. We have a new leader. As a new leader, what one thing would you say you must get right?
Ooh, blimey, that's an interesting one. I would say, I go back to that primary colours model. I would say being able to stand in the middle of that model and think, what should we be focusing on? And having enough self-awareness to know that if the thing you should be focusing on is not the thing you're good at, you give it to someone else. So for example, if you think, well, you know, what I love doing is team building. That's what so what I'd like to do is get the team together. But actually, what the business needs is a proper review of our systems or the development of a strategic plan. And I hate that, but that's what we need. Get somebody to do that. So self-awareness, I think there is research that shows that self-aware leaders are the best leaders. So knowing who you are and what you're good at, because you won't be good at all of that model. And knowing where to flex, I would say that's the one thing.
That segues into another question quite nicely, actually. Primary colours model looks like a great place to start. How do you go about embedding this type of thinking within a business?
So this model belongs to a consultancy in Bristol called Edgecombe, who I work with quite closely. And I have then, because I work with them quite closely, I've developed tools from it, and they've let me do that. So Anne-Marie and I have both used a tool that looks at, in our organisation, who does this and how well do we do it? And I've made a traffic light system out of it, you know, so we could be doing, we're hopeless at this. You know, we do this well, that's that kind of thing. Or I've done it, as I suggested, with this company where the leader said, I'll let my next in line have the support. And we looked at, well, how much is this part of your job and what do you need to develop here? Having an understanding of this is what leadership is, and you share that understanding is a starting point. And then using it as, sometimes I've used it with people as a framework when working with a team to say, well, okay, where should we be focusing as a leadership team now?
Okay, thank you. A couple more questions have just come in. Training or coaching, which one works best and in which situations?
I think they both have their place. So if you have an individual with no knowledge at all of what leadership and management looks like, then a great place for them to start would be on a training course where they can work with a peer group and learn from, you know, those peers, but also engage in a sort of structured curriculum, if you like, that covers all the key concepts, key topics, key techniques. So that training is great for knowledge acquisition. Depending on how that training is structured and how it's delivered, it can also be useful for some skill development. Mm-hmm. If you're looking to increase self-awareness, self-insight, and drive behavioural change, then that's where coaching can really come into its own. It's a much deeper connection between two individuals that drives really long-lasting change.
Thank you. Next one in, what can you offer to board of directors to effectively support a company? So for a whole board.
Again, that's going to depend on the number of hours that are available, the shape of the support package. So in the past, I've worked with boards where we've done an audit of the board. And we've looked at how effective the board is and where it needs to be more effective, and then put in place a plan to kind of close that gap. It's very much around, I think, again, looking at using a model or a framework as a base to establish the current state, and then agreeing some priorities and working towards those. It's very bespoke, so it's difficult to give a clear answer. I don't, Caroline, can you?
Well,
clearer?
What that's making me think is that are we distinguishing here between a board of directors and a senior leadership team? You know, so some organisations that's the same people, and some it isn't. So if you've got non-execs on your board of directors, for example, then that's a different shape. And one of, this isn't something I've done in an Innovate UK context, but in other situations, one of the things that's quite interesting to look at is, well, what's the role of the board of directors and what's the role of the senior leadership team if those are separate, and how do they not tread on each other's toes, and how do they communicate? It's a huge amount here in that creating alignment piece in the primary colours model, and the things around influence and how do you have influence here, and you know there's a huge amount of work on how to be a good non-exec director without stepping in and undermining the executive directors. So you know, it depends what we mean by a board of directors here, and there's a lot. We haven't talked very much about effective team working, but that piece about making sure that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, and that people trust each other, which I think is pretty fundamental, and can communicate well. That might be part of the same sort of piece. I noticed that there's a question in the chat as well.
I was going to say there is one in the chat, which is the last question I was going to come to, because I think we've got about a couple of minutes before we're due to finish. There's also a nice compliment, so I'm going to read that one out too first. So this session could have been written for our organisation and the path we're currently on. Absolutely great advice, and I'll be following up on this. Thank you. So that's the precursor to the last question, which is, we are a new EOT and we are moving away from command and control leadership, but not all the leaders within the organisation have the necessary traits to be able to step up. Do the panel have any advice for an incoming CEO?
I mean, for me, this is about being very clear about what it is that you're asking for behaviourally from your leaders, and then having those clear and transparent conversations where you together agree on the standards and what good looks like, and then where the chief exec offers support and ongoing support and coaching and feedback. So if we start with the belief that everybody's got positive intent, they all want to be the best leaders that they can possibly be, it's about enabling them to be that. So being very clear about what's expected and why that's different, rewarding it when you see it, and supporting it when you don't see it. You know, supporting different behaviours when necessary.
And the thing that I would add is working with people from where they are rather than where you want them to be. So accepting, okay, this is the leadership that's worked for this person up to now, or they believe has worked for them. You're expecting something very different. So just hammering them when they're not doing it is not, or telling them all the reasons why they should do it. There's quite an interesting technique. I don't know, Anne-Marie, have you ever worked with motivational interviewing? It's a
while back, yeah.
It's a very, very interesting technique that I just kind of dabbled around the edges of a little bit. It comes from alcohol addiction counselling, and it's about working with people when they are in denial that there's a problem, and trying to work with them, work with their ambivalence that maybe this isn't the way it should be. And if you just keep telling them why they should change, the only place for them to go is why they shouldn't. Whereas if you kind of go, okay, so this seems, you're comfortable drinking 8 pints a night, or you're comfortable just telling people what to do. Is that, how's that work? How does that fit with your ambition to be blah, blah, or, your aspiration for this, and let them fight with themselves rather than you.
Yeah. And often what you're doing with the chief exec in that role is enabling them to coach. Yeah. So transferring some of the skills that you bring as a coach to them, so that they then coach their team and help bring that team forward.
Absolutely.
What a nice place to finish. So to transfer your skills to the others in order to run their organisations, a perfect place to end. So thank you very much, Caroline. Thank you, Anne-Marie, for your wisdom today. Right. So let's close off for today. As I mentioned in the welcome, as participants of our webinar series Innovate 2021, you do have the opportunity to access a range of comprehensive business support tailored to your business needs, which can include Anne-Marie and Caroline. If you'd like to discuss your business needs further, please do contact the Innovate UK Edge team. The details are currently up on screen. As I said, we now take a short break with our webinars, returning later in May on Tuesday, the 25th of May, when we'll learn about 2 heavyweight brands, and we'll learn about turning vision into reality and bringing innovative ideas to market. So on that day, we'll have Innovation and Growth Specialist Heather Wright, formerly Executive Director and Partner at Content at Aardman Animations, and Ralph Wood, who is Senior Project Development Manager at Dyson. They will be talking about creating an innovation culture to design and development framework. And clearly this is a session not to miss if we're going to hear from Aardman Animations and Dyson's former staff. You can also sign up to this by following the website on screen, by scanning the code with your mobile phone, and I'm sure places will be in demand for that session as they have been for the whole webinar series. So thank you for attending today, and we look forward to seeing you next time at Innovate 2021. Thank you all.